A veteran Navy SEAL thought his hardest battles were over, until his dog stopped in the middle of the forest. Buried in mud and silence stood a 2-story yacht, lost for 14 years. What they found wasn't just steel and rust, it was unfinished time. As storms closed in, the question wasn't whether the boat could float again. It was whether a man who felt left behind could rise with it. Some miracles don't split the sky. They wait quietly to be found. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe in second chances, like and subscribe to K9 Navy SEAL Stories. Northern Michigan, late spring. Morning came soft and green, as if the world had decided to speak in whispers. North of the small towns and their polite stoplights, the forest held a different kind of time. White pines rose like cathedral columns, and the air smelled of resin and damp earth. Sharp and clean, the way memory sometimes felt right before it turned. Silas Rowan Hale walked that forest the way some men walked a shoreline, watching, listening, measuring the distance between himself and whatever might drag him under. He was 43, tall enough that the low branches surrendered without a fight. 6'1", shoulders wide, built like a man carved from practical stone. Not bulky for show, just the compact strength of someone trained for long hours and hard decisions. His face was angular, a clear jawline, cheekbones that caught the pale light when he turned. A rough beard shadowed his chin and throat, kept short out of habit rather than vanity. His eyes were a deep blue-gray, the color of lakes in bad weather, steady until something inside them moved. His hair was cut the way the military taught men to stop caring, short, dark brown, tidy. The sides near his temples were already threaded with early silver, like frost that came before its season. He wore the same outfit he wore most days, as if changing clothes might disturb whatever fragile peace he'd managed to negotiate with himself. An olive field jacket with frayed cuffs, a red and deep blue plaid flannel beneath it, dark blue cargo pants that still remembered deployments in their seams, and scuffed brown leather boots worn down at the toe. A battered military watch sat on his wrist, ticking like a small, stubborn heartbeat. A pocket knife rode in his jacket, and an Eberle stock half-track backpack rested against his spine. Packed with water, a first aid kit, a coil of cord, and the unspoken belief that preparation was a form of prayer. Beside him moved Ranger. Ranger was a German shepherd, canine with a coat of black and tan that gleamed when the sun found him. He wasn't the overfed softness of a suburban pet. He was lean muscle and restless intelligence, built for motion. His ears stood alert, as if the world was constantly trying to confess something, and Ranger refused to miss a word. His eyes were dark and focused, scanning the tree line, the wind, the shift of birds. He walked with that particular grace of working dogs. Quiet feet, controlled energy, always 2 steps ahead in purpose even when he stayed at heel. Silas didn't call Ranger a dog when he talked about him. Not out loud, anyway. Ranger was a partner, a shadow with teeth. A witness who never asked questions Silas couldn't answer. The walking had started as medical advice. A VA doctor in Marquette, gray-haired, polite, and painfully honest, had told him, "Move your body or your thoughts will move you instead." Silas had nodded like he nodded to all orders. He could follow instructions. That was never the problem. The problem was everything that happened in the quiet. In the quiet, the mind became a projector, and the past played itself with cruel, perfect sound. But the forest helped. The forest didn't care who he used to be. The trees didn't salute. The birds didn't ask. The wind didn't demand explanations. And Ranger had a talent for dragging Silas into the present with nothing more than a glance and a steady breath. Today, the air was warmer than it looked. Spring had turned the swampy lowlands into a glossy patchwork of mud and ferns. There were old tracks here, Logging roads half swallowed by moss and leaf litter, the kind of paths that used to matter to men who lived off timber and stubbornness. Silas didn't come out here for adventure. He came because it was empty, and because empty places, ironically, made it easier to feel less empty. Ranger trotted forward, nose low. His shoulders tightened just slightly, as if a wire had been pulled taut inside him. Silas noticed it immediately. That was his gift and his curse. Attention. In the teams, attention kept you alive. In civilian life, attention meant you heard every refrigerator click, every neighbor's car door, every silence between your own thoughts. Ranger paused. Not froze in fear. Ranger didn't do fear, but stopped with the precision of training. His nostrils flared. His tail held steady, not wagging, not tucked. His head turned left, following something the wind carried. Silas slowed, one hand unconsciously shifting the strap of his pack. His heart didn't race. It checked in, the way it used to before stepping into unknown buildings. "What is it?" he murmured, voice low out of habit. Ranger didn't look back for permission. He angled off the path. Silas followed. The ground dipped, and the trees grew closer together. Ferns brushed his boots. Somewhere nearby, water moved with a lazy, hidden sound, like an animal breathing behind a curtain. Ranger's pace increased. His nose worked fast now, sweeping the air, then the ground. He made a small sound in his throat, barely audible, more vibration than bark. Not alarm. Interest. Silas frowned. His mind offered a guess. Old fuel spill, abandoned machinery, maybe a rusted-out truck. The North Woods were full of forgotten things. As they pushed through a veil of saplings and thorny brush, the forest opened into a low, muddy clearing. And there, half swallowed by vines and time, was metal. At first, his brain refused the shape. It tried to make it a shed, a rail car, a collapsed roof. Then the angle shifted, and he saw the bow. A boat. Not a fishing skiff. Not a canoe dragged in by hunters. A yacht. 2 levels, steel-hulled, huge enough that it looked absurd among the trees, like a sea creature that had wandered inland and died of confusion. Rust streaked down its sides in orange-brown rivers. Window frames gaped empty in places, and creeping vines climbed the cabin like ivy claiming a ruined castle. It sat on thick mud, slightly tilted, as if it had settled there and decided not to argue. Silas stood still. Ranger moved forward with confidence, sniffing along the base of the hull, then circling back as if to report, "It's real. It's here. It's ours to understand." Silas exhaled slowly. The sight should have been funny. It was, in the way a joke is funny when you're too tired to laugh. A yacht in a forest. Michigan playing tricks. But something in him tightened. Not fear, not wonder. Recognition. Not of the object, of the feeling. A large thing, abandoned. A purpose interrupted. A story left unfinished. He stepped closer, boots sinking slightly in the wet ground. He studied the hull the way he would have studied a doorframe overseas, angles, weaknesses, signs of collapse. The steel looked thick. The corrosion was heavy, but not catastrophic. The structure hadn't caved. It had endured. Ranger stopped at the bow and looked up at Silas, ears forward. His eyes were intense, intelligent. Silas's throat felt dry. "How the hell?" he whispered. The forest offered no answer. It only watched. Patient as an old god, he walked along the side, brushing aside vines. Under the grime, faint lettering emerged, pale against rust. He leaned in until the smell of old metal and wet decay filled his nose. Northern Grace. The name hit him with the strange tenderness of a hymn he didn't believe in anymore. Grace, in the middle of nowhere, buried, waiting. He stood there a long moment, hand resting on the cold steel. It should have been colder than it was. Spring sunlight warmed it slightly, like the hull still remembered water. A memory rose uninvited. The weight of a ship's deck under his boots years ago, the taste of salt air, the way metal always felt like certainty. Back then, life had been simple in a brutal way. You had a mission. You had a team. You had noise to drown out thought. Here there was only birdsong and the soft creak of trees. Ranger huffed and continued sniffing, moving toward the shadowed space beneath the lower deck. Silas watched him, letting the silence fill in around his ribs. He told himself this was just a curiosity, a strange artifact, nothing more. But his body didn't believe him. His body had already shifted into that quiet readiness he'd tried to bury. Ranger stopped suddenly near the starboard side where the hull dipped into a darker pocket of mud. He didn't bark. He didn't whine. He simply stilled, every muscle locked, ears forward, nose lifted. His gaze fixed on a single point beneath the wreck, as if he were staring through metal and time. Then he sat. Perfect posture, command-trained, not the casual sit of a pet, but the deliberate sit of a working dog marking a find. Silas's pulse bumped once, hard. That sit meant something. It meant evidence. It meant scent. It meant someone was here, or something important remains. "Ranger," Silas said quietly, and his own voice surprised him with how sharp it sounded in the open air. Ranger didn't move. His eyes flicked to Silas just once, then back to the shadow. Silas crouched and reached under the edge of the hull, fingers sinking into cold mud. He felt around blindly. His fingertips brushed something that wasn't wood or stone. Something smooth. Something manufactured. He pulled slowly, and a small piece of corroded metal came free. An old cleat or bracket, heavy for its size, with a bolt still threaded through it. Not remarkable. Until he noticed the stain. A dark smear, too old to be fresh, but too deliberate to be random. Oil, maybe. Or something else. His stomach tightened. The forest suddenly didn't feel empty anymore. Ranger's ears twitched. Somewhere deeper in the trees, a bird went silent. Silas stayed crouched, holding that small piece of metal like a clue he wasn't sure he wanted. He looked up at the yacht again, at the broken windows and the vine-wrapped railings. And an odd thought came. Soft, unwelcome, almost humorous in its absurdity. This thing didn't just get lost. It got left. And in the quiet place behind his sternum, where he usually kept grief locked away, something stirred like a door cracking open. Silas stood slowly, wiping mud on his pant leg. He walked toward the bow again, reading the lines of the vessel, imagining it in motion. He tried to picture water here, tried to picture how a boat could have come so far inland. Then he heard it. Water. Not a puddle. Not a drip. A slow, moving current. He followed the sound past the yacht, stepping carefully over fallen branches and slick stones until he saw it. A narrow channel half choked by reeds and cattails, bending away into the trees, an old river arm, a forgotten vein that once carried water toward Lake Superior before storms, and years had redrawn the map. Silas stared at the channel, and the logic clicked into place, like a bolt seating into a thread. Flood years ago. Water high enough to lift a vessel, a current strong enough to push it into this side channel. Then the river changed. The water left. The boat remained. It wasn't magic. It was weather and time. Still, knowing how didn't explain why it still felt like a message. Ranger moved beside him and sat again, calmer now, as if satisfied Silas had seen what needed seeing. His gaze traveled between Silas and the yacht. Silas swallowed. He hadn't felt needed in a long time. Not in the simple, human way. Not in the way a thing could be broken and still worth touching. He stepped closer to the hull one last time and rested his palm against the rusted steel. The metal was warm. Not warm like life. Warm like something that had been waiting in the sun for someone to arrive. Silas's mouth twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. Humor, dry and reluctant, crept in like a shy guest. Of course, he muttered to nobody, to the trees, to the ghosts in his own head. A yacht in the woods. Ranger's tail thumped once against the mud, as if agreeing. Silas looked at the name again. Northern Grace. The word grace snagged him. It felt like a dare. He didn't make promises. Not anymore. But as he turned to leave, Ranger didn't follow immediately. The dog paused, staring at the wreck with quiet intensity, then looked back at Silas, eyes steady, serious. A question without words. Silas held the gaze for a beat longer than he meant to. Then he nodded once, more to himself than to the dog. "Yeah," he said softly. "I saw it." Ranger fell into step beside him. They walked back through the pines as the sun climbed higher, the resin scent sharpening in the warmth. Behind them, the yacht stayed where it had been for years, silent, rusted, half holy in its stubbornness. But something in Silas had shifted. Not healed, not solved. Shifted. And that was enough, for now. He didn't know what the Northern Grace was. He only knew he would be thinking about it long after the forest disappeared. Behind him. Silas did not return the next morning. He waited 3 days. 3 days of telling himself it had only been a strange sight in the woods. 3 days of splitting firewood behind the cabin, of sanding down a warped porch plank, of sitting at the small kitchen table, while Ranger lay at his boots like a silent anchor. But the image of the yacht did not fade. It sharpened. On the 4th morning, he packed the half-track with deliberate care. Work gloves, a folding shovel, a thermos of black coffee, a length of surveyor's tape. He told himself it was reconnaissance, nothing more. Ranger sensed the difference in his gait before they even reached the tree line. The dog's tail held higher, his focus tighter. He moved ahead but kept glancing back, confirming direction. The forest was warmer now. Sunlight filtered through new leaves, painting the ground in fractured gold. The air carried that damp sweetness that followed recent rain. When they stepped into the clearing, the yacht looked smaller in daylight, but not less strange. Silas circled it slowly. He crouched near the hull, examining the metal more closely than before. There was a faint horizontal stain running along the side, darker than rust, about 4 feet up from the current mud line. A high water mark. He followed it with his finger, tracing the faint discoloration across the length of the steel. "Flood," he murmured. He moved to the bow. The anchor chain hung slack, twisted in an unnatural angle. The anchor itself lay half buried in dried mud, not deployed properly, but dragged. He stepped back, scanning the ground. There were faint gouge lines in the earth, running in parallel arcs toward the old river channel he'd discovered before. The marks were subtle, softened by years of leaf fall and erosion. But they were there, dragged, carried, left behind. Ranger sniffed along the base of the hull, then trotted toward the reeds near the water channel. His movements were purposeful, but calm now. Less alert, more investigative. Silas stood and followed the faint sound of water again. The narrow channel wound away through cattails and fallen logs, barely navigable now. But in the height of a spring flood, it could have been deep enough, strong enough. He imagined the storm, water rising overnight, lifting the vessel from its moorings, pushing it sideways into this forgotten arm. When the current changed, when the river carved a new path, the water receded and left the yacht stranded like driftwood too heavy to move again. It wasn't mystical. It was geography. But something about that explanation did not quiet him. Silas returned to the clearing and brushed vines away from a lower porthole. The glass had shattered long ago, and inside, shadows. He climbed carefully onto the tilted deck, boots testing each step. The wood creaked, but held. The interior smelled of rot and still air. Sunlight pierced through broken windows, illuminating dust and hanging cobwebs. A captain's chair sat crooked near the helm, its leather cracked like dry earth. A small wooden table had collapsed under its own weight. Ranger leapt lightly onto the deck behind him, paws silent. Silas stepped into the cabin and ran a hand over the console. The instruments were dead, faces clouded and unreadable. He wasn't thinking about restoring it. He wasn't thinking about saving it. He was thinking about jurisdiction. That thought annoyed him. He climbed back down and walked a slow perimeter around the yacht, mentally mapping it. About an hour into his survey, he heard an engine. The sound was faint at first, muffled by trees, but unmistakable. Tires on gravel, a vehicle approaching the logging road. Silas straightened instinctively. Ranger turned toward the sound, ears high. A green state truck appeared through the trees, bouncing slowly along the uneven path until it reached the edge of the clearing. The driver's door opened. Mara Kincaid stepped out. She was about 40, maybe a year or two older. Medium height, athletic build, shaped more by practical labor than gym vanity. Her dark blonde hair was pulled into a low ponytail, strands catching sunlight. Her skin was fair but weathered by seasons outdoors. Her uniform shirt, deep forest green, fit neatly across squared shoulders, the ranger patch visible on the sleeve. Her eyes were sharp gray blue, observant without being hostile. She noticed Ranger first. "Easy," she said calmly, hands visible at her sides. Ranger did not bark. He stood alert but neutral, reading her posture the way he'd been trained to read strangers. Silas stepped forward, removing his gloves. "Mornin'." Her gaze traveled from Ranger to Silas, taking in the field jacket, the boots, the watch. She registered the way he stood, balanced, weight evenly distributed. People like her noticed those things. "You've been out here more than once," she said. It wasn't a question. Silas didn't flinch. "I walked the area, and you found it." He followed her line of sight to the yacht. "Yes." She studied the hull, then looked back at him. "That's not a fishing boat someone dragged in for fun." "No," he said evenly. She stepped closer to the vessel, circling it slowly. "This land's under state oversight," she said. "And abandoned property still counts as property." Silas folded his arms loosely, not defensive but steady. "I haven't touched anything structural." "You climbed aboard." "Yes." She stopped walking and faced him directly. "You planning to claim it?" The question lingered. He hesitated. "I don't know yet." She nodded once, assessing. There was no contempt in her expression, no bureaucratic smugness, just caution. "You'll need to file a report," she said. "If it's truly abandoned and the owner's estate has no active claim, there's a process." "And if I don't?" She held his gaze. "Then it becomes unauthorized salvage." A pause. "You don't strike me as someone who ignores process," she added quietly. Something about that comment landed more precisely than she likely intended. Silas exhaled slowly. "What's the process?" Her posture relaxed slightly. "County registry first, verify ownership, insurance disposition, environmental clearance. This area had a minor diesel spill 15 years ago during the flood. That's partly why nobody's bothered with it. Contamination? Minimal now. But paperwork stays longer than pollution. A hint of dry humor flickered in her eyes. Silas almost smiled. Almost. As Mara spoke, Ranger drifted toward the starboard side of the yacht again. He didn't sit this time. He didn't mark anything obvious. Instead, he stared up at one of the shattered upper windows. Completely still. Not curious, focused. Mara noticed. "That dog's trained," she said softly. "Yes." "For search?" "Yes." She looked back at the window, then at Silas. "You ever wonder what else he's picking up?" The question hung between them. Not about scent, but about things less measurable. Ranger's ears twitched, but he didn't look away from the dark opening above. For a moment the forest felt suspended. Silas followed Ranger's gaze and felt that quiet tightening in his chest again. A sense, not of danger, of unfinished business. He swallowed and forced his attention back to Mara. "Registry's open till 4, she said. "Marquette office handles maritime titles." He nodded. "You're not stopping me?" "I'm advising you," she replied evenly. Big difference. She glanced at Ranger once more. "Good dog." Ranger shifted his weight but didn't wag. When she climbed back into her truck, she left him with one last look. "File it," she said through the open window. "Or someone else eventually will." The engine faded into the trees. Silas stood in the clearing, listening to the forest reclaim its silence. He looked at the yacht again. At the rust. At the broken windows. At the name faint beneath corrosion. Northern Grace. Ownership. Liability. Responsibility. He had avoided all three for years outside of his own small life. Ranger moved to his side and leaned gently against his leg, just enough pressure to register. Silas rested a hand on the dog's head. "You always did have timing," he muttered. He wasn't sure if he meant the flood, or the Ranger, or the fact that out of all the forest, out of all the miles of emptiness, he had found this. He scanned the clearing one last time. He did not promise himself anything. He did not vow to restore. He did not vow to walk away. But as he turned toward the logging road, one decision had settled firmly into place. He would go to town. He would look up the name. He would find out who Thomas Avery had been. Not because the yacht asked, not because fate demanded, but because leaving it there without knowing felt too much like something he had already done once in another lifetime. Ranger fell into step beside him. Behind them, the yacht remained still, silent witness to water that had once lifted it high enough to travel. Now it waited for paperwork, and perhaps something else. Silas did not go to the forest first. He went to town. Marquette in late spring carried that restrained optimism common to northern places. The lake still held winter in its breath, but storefront windows had been washed, and hanging flower baskets waited like quiet promises. Silas parked his truck along Washington Street, engine ticking as it cooled. Ranger sat upright in the passenger seat, watching pedestrians with focused calm. He did not bark. He cataloged. "Stay," Silas said. Ranger obeyed, though his eyes followed Silas through the windshield until the door shut. The county registry office occupied the second floor of a brick building that had survived more decades than most of its records. The stairwell smelled faintly of paper and dust. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Behind a long counter sat a woman in her late 50s, posture erect, hair steel gray and neatly pinned at the nape of her neck. Her nameplate read, Evelyn Mercer. Evelyn had the look of someone who trusted order more than people. Thin-framed glasses rested low on her nose. Her blouse was pale blue, pressed. Her eyes were steady, observant without warmth, but not unkind. Yes? She asked, fingers poised above a keyboard. I'm looking into a vessel title, Silas said evenly. Northern Grace. Her fingers paused. Registration number? Don't have it. She studied him briefly, his jacket, his boots, the careful economy in his stance. Location? He hesitated only a fraction. Found it inland, north of the old logging road near Cedar Arm. Her brows lifted. Inland? She repeated. Yes, ma'am. She did not smile at the courtesy. She typed. The clicking of keys filled the quiet room. After a moment, she adjusted her glasses. Northern Grace, 38-foot steel hull cruiser. Registered to Thomas Avery. Filed as a constructive total loss 14 years ago. Constructive total loss? Silas asked. Insurance determination, she said. Recovery cost exceeded insured value. Claim paid. Title transferred to insurer. Insurer declined retrieval due to environmental conditions. And now? Insurer dissolved 5 years later during merger. She tapped the screen. No active claimant. Silas absorbed that. What happens to property like that? If abandoned on state land, it may be petitioned for salvage claim, she replied, after environmental inspection and public notice. He nodded slowly. Evelyn regarded him over the rim of her glasses. You're not the first to inquire about unusual things, she said, but you are the first to ask about that one. You've heard of it? No. A pause. But the flood that year moved more than trees. Her voice held something quiet beneath its administrative tone. Something like memory. Silas inclined his head. What about the owner? Evelyn's fingers hovered again. Thomas Avery, she read. Former commercial, charter operator, resident of Marquette. Deceased 8 years ago. The words settled without drama. Family? Silas asked. One daughter, relocated out of state. Silas exhaled slowly. Any record of why the vessel was moored near Cedar Arm? Evelyn's lips thinned thoughtfully. There was a marina there. Smaller operation. Washed out during the flood. Most records were lost. Silas thanked her and accepted a printed summary sheet. As he turned to leave, Evelyn added, Mr. Hale. He paused. You may wish to consider why something stays when everything else moves on. It was not legal advice. It was not procedural. It was something else. Silas nodded once and left. Outside, Ranger greeted him with restrained energy, tail wagging once before settling. Silas opened the passenger door. Owner's gone, he said quietly. Ranger tilted his head slightly, as if that information required filing. They drove toward the forest. The clearing looked unchanged, but the knowledge Silas carried altered its gravity. Thomas Avery. A name instead of an absence. Silas climbed aboard the yacht again, moving with greater intention. He searched below the helm more carefully this time, lifting warped panels, brushing away debris. Near the rear of the cabin, beneath what had once been a storage bench, his boot struck metal. A hollow sound. He knelt and cleared damp insulation away. There, wedged between beams, was a rectangular metal tin. Dull gray, sealed tight, not new, not decorative, deliberate. Ranger moved close, nose working intensely, but calmly. Silas wiped mud from the lid. The latch resisted at first, corroded by years of moisture. He used his pocket knife to pry it open. Inside were documents sealed in plastic sleeves. Receipts for engine repairs, marina invoices, a folded lake map with several fishing spots circled in red, and at the bottom, a cassette tape, unlabeled. Silas stared at it for a long moment. Cassette tapes belonged to another decade, to long drives and imperfect recordings. He closed the tin gently and carried it outside, sitting on the slanted deck where sunlight fell clean across the metal. Ranger lay beside him, chin on paws. Silas turned the cassette over in his hands. He almost left it unopened. Almost. Instead, he slipped it into the small portable tape player he kept in his pack. An old habit from years ago, when certain sounds grounded him better than silence. He pressed play. Static. Then a man's voice, older, roughened by cold air and late nights. Not theatrical, not dramatic. "This is Thomas Avery," the voice began, steady but tired. "If someone finds this, it means the river had its say." Silas felt his throat tighten unexpectedly. He leaned back against the railing. Thomas spoke of repairs made too late, of weather forecasts misjudged, of insurance conversations that felt like surrender. His tone never cracked. No self-pity, no grand speeches. Just facts layered with quiet acceptance. Silas watched the forest while he listened. Birdsong drifted through broken windows. Wind brushed through leaves overhead. The voice continued. "I thought I could outlast it," Thomas said. "The bills, the storms, pride's a stubborn thing." A faint chuckle followed. "I kept telling my daughter the boat wasn't failing. I was just short on time." Silas closed his eyes. He knew that tone. Men who did not want sympathy. Men who only wanted understanding. Midway through the recording, the tape crackled. Thomas's voice lowered slightly. "There's something about a hull," he said. "Steel remembers pressure. It doesn't shatter like fiberglass. It bends. It endures." There was a long pause. Then softly, "This boat never failed me. I ran out of chances before she ran out of strength." Silas's hand tightened around the tape player. For a moment, the forest seemed to lean closer. Not because of fate, not because of destiny, but because the words struck too cleanly. He had told himself something similar once, about a mission that went sideways, about time, about choices. Ranger lifted his head and studied Silas's face, not anxious, not alarmed, just attentive, present. The tape hissed, then continued. Thomas spoke of the flood, water rising faster than expected, the marina's dock lines snapping in darkness, the boat drifting free. "I tried to reach her," Thomas said, "but sometimes the river decides." Silas let the words settle. The recording ended without ceremony. No goodbye, no signature, just static. Silas did not cry. He sat there, staring at the rusted bow. The yacht no longer felt anonymous. It felt interrupted. He turned the tape player off and rested his elbows on his knees. "Steel remembers pressure," he muttered quietly. Ranger nudged his hand once. Silas looked at the name again. Northern Grace. Grace implied forgiveness, implied mercy, implied something given, not earned. He didn't know what he believed about grace, but he believed in endurance. He stood and walked the length of the deck again, slower this time. He did not imagine restoration. He imagined continuity. Thomas Avery had not left a treasure. He had left a statement. Silas crouched near the railing and ran his fingers along the weld seams. They were solid beneath corrosion. The structure had held, even abandoned, even forgotten. The boat had not died. It had simply been left behind when circumstances changed. And that distinction mattered more than Silas expected. Ranger rose and moved toward the bow, looking out toward the narrow water channel beyond the reeds. The forest was quiet again. No engines, no interruptions. Silas closed the tin carefully and secured it in his pack. He would not take everything yet. Just the tape, just the knowledge. As he stepped down from the deck, boots sinking slightly into damp earth, he felt something unfamiliar. not resolve. Recognition. He had spent years thinking that leaving a thing unfinished meant failure. Thomas Avery had believed otherwise. Sometimes time failed first. Silas adjusted his jacket collar and looked back one last time. The yacht leaned patiently against gravity. It did not ask, it did not accuse, it waited. And for the first time since discovering it, Silas allowed himself a thought that did not feel like obligation. Maybe endurance was enough to begin with. He whistled softly. Ranger fell into step beside him. They walked back through the pines, carrying the weight of a voice that had crossed 14 years of silence to be heard. Silas did not yet decide what to do. But something inside him had shifted from curiosity to consideration. And that was movement. Silas did not begin with restoration. He began with removal. The first thing he cleared away was the quiet lie he had been telling himself, that he was only coming back to observe. On a gray morning heavy with humidity, he returned to the clearing carrying work gloves, a pry bar, contractor-grade trash bags, and a coil of marine rope. The sky hung low over northern Michigan, swollen with rain not yet fallen. Ranger moved ahead, weaving through brush with controlled precision. His black and tan coat was damp from dew, catching light in muted flashes. He was 7 now, past the reckless edge of youth, deep into disciplined adulthood. His muscles moved beneath his coat like coiled wire. His ears flicked at every shift of wind. Silas paused at the edge of the clearing. The yacht loomed there in the soft gloom, tilted, rust-streaked, patient. Northern grace. He stepped closer and set his pack down. "I'm not fixing you," he muttered quietly. "Just cleaning." Ranger circled once and sat near the bow, watchful but relaxed. Silas climbed aboard and began with small things. Loose debris, collapsed shelving, rotten cushions. Each movement was deliberate, methodical. Clearing space was easier than making decisions. The deck groaned under his boots, but held. He tied off a length of rope from the stern to a thick white pine trunk nearby. It was not enough to anchor the vessel permanently, but enough to prevent further tilt if the ground shifted. The air changed. The forest stilled in that subtle way it does before weather breaks. Silas felt it in his joints first. Then the rain began. Not a drizzle. A sudden driving downpour that hammered the metal hull with sharp percussion. Water cascaded from the upper deck in sheets. Within minutes, the soft mud beneath the yacht began to liquefy. Silas tightened the rope, bracing one boot against the hull. "Easy," he muttered, though he wasn't sure whether he meant the boat or himself. Water flowed in narrow rivulets beneath the keel, carving shallow channels in the mud. The vessel shifted, just slightly at first, then more. The sound of metal grinding against unseen stone cut through the rain. Silas felt the vibration in his hands. He moved toward the stern to adjust the line. That was when his boots slipped. The mud gave way under him, slick and sudden. His heel slid, his balance gone in an instant. He hit the deck hard, shoulder first. The impact echoed. For a fraction of a second, time fractured. The rain striking metal became something else. The grinding hull became something else. The forest dissolved into a different place entirely. Metal on metal, water in boots, a shout over comms. A door breached too late. His breath shortened violently. Air felt thin, wrong. He rolled to his knees but did not stand. The rain blurred into static in his ears. His hands trembled, not from cold, from memory. The yacht shifted again with a dull thud. He froze, muscles locked, chest tight. Ranger reacted before Silas consciously registered it. The dog leapt up onto the deck, paws steady despite the slick surface. He did not bark. He did not panic. He moved directly to Silas and pressed his body firmly against him. Solid contact from shoulder to rib cage. Warm, grounded. Silas's breath came in ragged pulls. Ranger nudged his forearm with deliberate force, then leaned in harder, anchoring. Silas focused on the pressure, on the weight, on the feel of fur against wet fabric. "Here," he whispered hoarsely. "Here." The word was not for the dog. It was for himself. The rain continued its assault, but gradually the roar in his ears separated from the roar in his head. Metal became metal again. Rain became rain. The forest reassembled itself around him. His pulse slowed from chaos to manageable rhythm. He placed a hand on Ranger's neck and felt the steady, even beat beneath fur. Not memory. Now. The vessel groaned once more, but did not slide further. The rope held. The rain began to ease. Silas remained kneeling long after his breath steadied. Water ran from his jacket sleeves. Mud coated his palms. He did not look heroic. He looked human. When he finally stood, his shoulder protested, but the pain was clean and present, not borrowed from another year. He scanned the clearing. The yacht had shifted no more than a few inches. The mud had resettled. The storm had passed as abruptly as it arrived. Silas stepped back from the hull and exhaled slowly. He had not saved the boat. He had tied a rope and fallen. That was the truth. He laughed once under his breath, short and humorless. Not exactly textbook. Ranger shook himself free of water, droplets scattering in a wide arc, then resumed his calm stance. Silas looked at him for a long moment. "You didn't hesitate," he said quietly. Ranger's gaze held steady. There was no triumph in it, only readiness. Silas walked to the bow and rested both hands against the steel. Rainwater dripped from his sleeves. He had told himself this was just clearing debris. But the storm had exposed something else. He had not returned for the boat. He had returned because he could not bear the thought of something slipping away again without trying to hold it. That realization settled slowly. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just true. He walked the perimeter once more, checking the rope tension, testing footing. He drove a wooden stake deeper into the ground near the pine and secured the line tighter. The work steadied him. Every knot tied correctly, every movement controlled. Control did not erase memory, but it reduced its volume. As he worked, footsteps approached from the direction of the logging road. He straightened instinctively. A man emerged through the brush, broad-shouldered, thick gray beard, denim jacket darkened by rain. He carried himself with the heavy gait of someone accustomed to lifting engines and stubborn machinery. "Didn't expect company," the man called over the damp hush. Silas nodded cautiously. "Morning." The man stepped into the clearing and took in the yacht with a long, low whistle. "Well, I'll be," he muttered. He was in his early 60s, built solid despite age, hands scarred and oil-stained. His eyes were pale and thoughtful beneath bushy brows. He wore work boots crusted with dried grease. "Name's Eli Bowman," he said, extending a hand without ceremony. "Folks call me Wrench." Silas accepted the handshake. Silas Hale. Eli's grip was firm but not competitive. "State Ranger mentioned someone poking around an old hull up here," Eli said. "Figured I'd see it before someone decided to torch it." Silas glanced at the yacht. "Not planning on torching anything." Eli nodded approvingly. "Good. Steel like that's not common these days." He walked slowly around the vessel, eyes trained, assessing structural integrity the way a surgeon might evaluate bone. "Flood put her here?" he asked. "That's the key. Working theory." Eli crouched and ran his fingers along the lower seam. "She held," he observed. "That's something." Silas studied him. "You worked boats?" 40 years, Eli replied. "Lake Superior humbles fiberglass. Steel's different." He stood and looked at Silas more directly. You planning to move her? Silas hesitated. I don't know. Eli smiled faintly. That usually means yes. Silas did not return the smile. Eli glanced at Ranger. Good dog. Ranger's ears flicked once, but he remained composed. The sky lightened as clouds thinned. Steam began rising faintly from the hull, where rain met warmer metal. Eli adjusted his jacket collar. If you're thinking salvage, you'll need more than rope, he said calmly. Ground's unstable after heavy rain. She could settle deeper. Silas nodded. I'll look into it. Eli began walking back toward the road, then paused. For what it's worth, he added, without turning, fully around, some things deserve a second watch. The phrase lingered in the damp air. Silas watched him disappear into trees. Ranger shifted closer to his side again, not pressing this time, just standing near. Silas turned back to the yacht. Rainwater dripped steadily from the railing. The clearing smelled sharper now. Wet soil and pine resin intensified. He stepped onto the deck once more and stood upright. The storm had not destroyed the vessel. It had tested it, and it had tested him. He looked at his mud-streaked hands and flexed his fingers. Today, he had not saved the boat. But he had not walked away either. That mattered more than he expected. Silas untied the temporary rope, retensioned it properly, and secured it with cleaner knots. Then he climbed down and retrieved his pack. Enough for today, he said quietly. Ranger fell into step beside him. Behind them the yacht leaned, but remained standing, held not by miracle, but by tension properly tied. Silas did not yet call it a decision. But something had shifted beyond curiosity. He would not let it slip without trying. Silas did not announce his decision. He simply showed up the next morning with a flatbed trailer borrowed from Eli Bowman and a list written in block letters on a folded sheet of paper. 1. Stabilize hull. 2. Remove interior rot. 3. Extract engine. No speeches, no vows, just work. The forest smelled cleaner after the storm, washed and sharpened. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in wide beams, turning the damp clearing into something almost ceremonial. Ranger trotted ahead, calmer than he had been in days. His stride was smooth, measured. The edge of alertness had softened into watchfulness. He paused at the perimeter of the clearing, scanned the tree line, then gave a low, satisfied huff before settling near the bow. Eli arrived 15 minutes later in an aging Ford pickup that rattled like loose bolts in a coffee can. The man climbed out with the deliberate movements of someone who knew exactly how much his knees could tolerate. Eli Bowman, wrench, looked like he'd been assembled from spare parts salvaged from a marina scrapyard. Thick gray beard, eyebrows heavy and expressive, hands permanently marked by oil and metal filings. His shoulders were still broad despite his 62 years. He moved slower than he probably wanted to, but not uncertainly. He surveyed the yacht in full daylight and nodded. She's uglier up close, he said. That's good. Means she's honest. Silas almost smiled. They walked around the hull together, boots sinking slightly in softened mud. Eli tapped the steel plating with the butt of a wrench, listening to the tone. Surface corrosion, he muttered. But the ribs held. Silas listened carefully, absorbing every word. I won't rebuild the inboard, Eli continued. Cost isn't worth it. You're better off stripping it and mounting an outboard bracket. Modern motor, cleaner, lighter. Silas nodded. He had already begun to accept that this wasn't resurrection. It was adaptation. They set to work. Rope tension was adjusted first. Proper anchor points reinforced around nearby trees. Eli explained leverage and weight distribution without condescension. Silas followed instructions precisely. Muscle memory from another life, translating seamlessly into mechanical obedience. The engine extraction was brutal. 14 years of damp had welded bolts into stubborn resistance. They applied penetrating oil and patience in equal measure. The cabin smelled of rust and stale insulation as they dismantled panels and wiring. Ranger stayed outside, pacing occasionally, ears twitching to the rhythm of metal against metal. Around noon, another vehicle approached. Silas stiffened instinctively before recognizing the Ranger truck. Mara Kincaid stepped out again, clipboard tucked under one arm. In daylight, she appeared less like an enforcer and more like a guardian of boundaries. Her uniform fit sharply, sleeves rolled to reveal forearms marked with faint freckles and old scratches from brambles. She carried herself upright, shoulders squared by years of hiking uneven terrain. "You filed?" she said, not accusing, confirming. "Yes." She nodded once. "Environmental inspections clear. Soil sample came back minimal contamination. You'll still need public notice posted for 30 days, but no active claim." Eli grunted approvingly. "That's about as clean as salvage gets." Mara glanced at the engine partially hoisted by the trailer winch. "You're serious?" Silas met her gaze. "Yes." She studied him longer than before. "You're not doing this to flip it for profit." It wasn't phrased as a question. No. She seemed satisfied with that. "Then do it right," she said simply. "And don't cut corners with the mounting bracket." Eli chuckled. "Wouldn't dare." She left without ceremony, tires crunching over gravel. Silas watched the truck disappear between trees. He felt something unfamiliar settling in his chest. Not pride. Belonging. They worked until late afternoon. The old engine finally came free with a metallic groan, swinging awkwardly from the hoist before lowering onto the trailer bed. Silas wiped sweat and grime from his brow. The yacht felt lighter already, hollowed of something heavy and dead. Ranger approached the exposed engine compartment and sniffed cautiously. Silas crouched beside him. "Empty's not the same as broken," he said quietly. Ranger flicked his ears and sat. As Silas leaned into the stripped engine bay to assess the interior supports, Ranger suddenly moved, not urgently, not alarmed, but with focused intention. He stepped inside the cabin and disappeared behind what remained of a warped cabinet panel. There was a sharp scratch of claw against wood. Silas straightened. "Ranger?" No bark, no growl, just a low, almost inquisitive whine. Silas climbed inside and found the dog standing over a narrow section of flooring near the stern. The planks were damp but intact. Ranger placed one paw firmly against the board, not scratching wildly, pressing, marking. Silas knelt and pressed down on the plank. It shifted slightly. A hollow echo followed. Eli appeared behind him, wiping hands on a rag. "What have you got?" Silas pried at the board carefully until it lifted free. Beneath it was a narrow compartment sealed in plastic sheeting. Inside lay a small brass compass, untarnished despite the years, and a folded photograph protected by wax paper. Silas picked up the photo. A man stood on the deck of the Northern Grace, younger, wind in his hair, a girl, maybe 10, standing beside him, holding the same brass compass. The girl's smile was wide and fearless. No inscription, no note. Just a moment preserved. Ranger lowered himself beside Silas and rested his chin near the edge of the compartment. The forest outside seemed impossibly quiet. Eli leaned closer and exhaled softly. "Well," he muttered, "that's something." Silas stared at the image. It wasn't evidence. It wasn't instruction. It was memory. And memory, he knew too well, had weight. He placed the compass back gently, but kept the photograph in his hand a moment longer. Then he sealed the compartment again. Not everything needed immediate explanation. Work resumed. Boards were removed, rusted fixtures discarded, mud scraped away from beneath the hull. By evening, the yacht no longer looked buried. It looked revealed. Steel ribs caught golden light as the sun dipped low. The name along the hull was clearer now beneath scraped corrosion. Northern Grace. Silas stood at the bow and exhaled slowly. June Halverson arrived just as the sky shifted toward amber. Her sedan was modest and spotless. She stepped out carrying a thermos and a box wrapped in a dish towel. June was 67, soft-faced but sharp-eyed, hair silver and gently curled around her temples. She wore a beige knit sweater despite the mild weather, and sensible walking shoes dusted with gravel. She approached with the confidence of someone accustomed to feeding entire communities without asking permission. "Thought you boys might need coffee," she said warmly. Eli smiled for the first time all day. "June, you're an angel." She handed Silas a cup. Her eyes studied him, not prying, not pitying. "You're the veteran," she said gently. "Yes, ma'am." "You don't look like you're running," she observed. Silas glanced at the hull. "Trying not to." June nodded once. "Good." She turned to Ranger and crouched slightly, offering her hand. Ranger approached cautiously, sniffed, then allowed a brief touch to his shoulder. "Handsome fellow," she murmured. The sun slipped lower, casting long shadows. They stood together in silence for a few minutes. 3 adults and a dog around a salvaged hull in a northern clearing. No speeches, no grand meaning declared. Just presence. When June left, she said only, "Keep at it." As Eli packed tools into the truck, he glanced at Silas. "Didn't think you were the community type." Silas shrugged. "Didn't either." They drove away in opposite directions as dusk settled. Silas remained a moment longer. He stepped back and surveyed the clearing. The yacht was no longer swallowed. It stood distinct against the trees, not restored, not whole, but no longer abandoned. Ranger stood beside him, posture relaxed but alert to the fading light. Silas rested a hand on the cool steel. He had not done this to prove anything. He had not done it to honor Thomas Avery. He had done it because leaving again was no longer an option he wanted to choose. He locked the trailer hitch and slung his pack over his shoulder. "Tomorrow," he said quietly. Ranger followed. Behind them, the Northern Grace caught the last streak of sunset along its hull. And for the first time since it had run out of water, it looked less like something forgotten and more like something waiting. The morning they chose to move, the Northern Grace felt almost ceremonial. Not because anyone declared it so, but because the air carried that particular stillness that comes before a threshold is crossed. Silas arrived before sunrise. Mist hovered low over the clearing, pale and shifting. The hull of the yacht rose through it like something ancient and patient. Weeks of labor had changed her shape. The mud had been carved away, the deck cleared. The engine compartment reinforced. A custom steel bracket, fabricated in Eli's shop, was now bolted firmly to the stern, ready for the new outboard motor waiting back in town. Ranger walked the perimeter twice before settling near the bow. His coat gleamed dark in the blue-gray dawn. He no longer carried the restless tension of uncertainty. He carried focus. Silas ran a hand along the hull. "Today," he said quietly. Eli arrived next, driving slower than usual, trailer rattling behind him. The older man stepped out stiffly, denim jacket hanging loose over broad shoulders. He looked more serious than Silas had seen him before. "Ground still soft in spots," Eli warned. "We take it slow." Silas nodded. The plan was straightforward. Winch the yacht carefully onto the reinforced trailer frame. Use wooden rollers beneath the keel to ease the movement. Secure the load. Tow it along the logging path toward the shallow channel where water had once claimed it. From there, lower it gently back into navigable depth. Straightforward did not mean easy. They began with the winch. Steel cable tightened, humming under tension. The hull creaked, but moved, inches at a time. Mud released its hold reluctantly. Silas monitored alignment, adjusting blocks beneath the keel. Eli controlled the winch crank with steady rhythm. Ranger remained positioned near the bow, ears forward, eyes tracking each shift. The first hour passed without incident. The second felt heavier. As the yacht rolled fully onto the trailer supports, Eli exhaled slowly. "She's centered," he said. "Let's pull." Silas climbed into the driver's seat of the truck. Eli remained outside, guiding. The engine growled to life. The truck eased forward. The trailer wheels dipped slightly into damp earth, but held. 10 feet, 20. Then the ground changed. The section near the old drainage bend had not dried evenly after recent rain. Beneath the surface crust lay deep, saturated mud. The right trailer wheel sank abruptly. The truck lurched sideways. Silas braked instinctively. Eli shouted, "Stop!" The engine cut. Silence fell with startling weight. The trailer leaned sharply, the hull tilting with it. Not enough to fall, enough to threaten. Mud swallowed half the tire. Silas stepped out, boots immediately sinking into soft ground. He stared at the wheel. Time. It was always about time. The echo of Thomas Avery's voice brushed the back of his mind. Not replayed, not spoken aloud, just remembered. He swallowed. "Can we jack it?" Silas asked. Eli crouched near the axle, studying the angle. "Not without sinking deeper," he muttered. "Axle's under stress." Silas walked to the bow. Ranger stood there, body aligned with the direction of the water channel ahead. He did not pace. He did not whine. He simply stood, as if forward was the only acceptable direction. Silas rested his hands on his hips and stared at the sinking wheel. For a fleeting second, a familiar thought tried to surface. This is where it stops. He felt it gathering, an old reflex. Failure, abort, recalculate, walk away. He exhaled slowly. Not this time. He turned back to Eli. "What do we have?" he asked evenly. Eli's eyes narrowed with focus. "Spare boards, steel plate in the bed. We build a ramp." Silas nodded once. They moved immediately. No arguing, no lamenting. Wood planks were dragged from the truck bed. Steel sheeting positioned beneath the sunken tire. Mud carved away by shovel and brute force. Sweat replaced cold, air in their lungs. The sun climbed higher. The angle of the trailer did not worsen, but it did not improve. Silas knelt near the wheel, pressing the steel plate deeper beneath it. Mud sucked at his boots. Eli repositioned the jack carefully to relieve pressure from the axle. The metal groaned. Ranger shifted position. He moved from the bow and stood directly beside Silas, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. Not pressing, just present. Silas glanced at him briefly. "Yeah," he murmured. "Together." They reattached the winch cable to a secondary tree anchor. Redirecting tension, Eli cranked slowly. The truck engaged in low gear. The tire resisted. Then, a subtle lift. The wheel climbed half an inch, then another. Mud sucked, released, sucked again. Silas leaned into the steel plate, guiding its position. "Easy," Eli muttered. The tire rose fully onto the makeshift ramp. The trailer leveled. For a moment, no one spoke. Silas exhaled through clenched teeth. The worst had passed, but not the distance remaining. They advanced again, inch by inch. Every soft patch tested them. Every adjustment demanded precision. By the time the narrow water channel came into full view, the sun hung low and amber. The channel had deepened slightly since spring rains. Water reflected gold beneath reeds and cattails. Silas cut the engine. The trailer stood at the edge of firm ground. The water waited below. Eli wiped sweat from his brow. "Well," he said quietly, "here we are." Lowering the yacht required careful balance. They secured guide ropes along both sides. Eli operated the release mechanism, while Silas controlled descent with steady tension. The hull slid forward slowly. Wood rollers turned beneath weight. Steel touched water for the first time in 14 years. There was no dramatic splash, only a heavy, deliberate settling sound. The hull rocked once, twice, then steadied. Silas held his breath without realizing it. Ranger stepped forward onto the shallow edge, paws touching water before the hull fully floated free. He did not hesitate. He placed both front paws onto the bow platform as it lowered. Balanced. Steady, as if confirming stability. Silas watched him carefully. The waterline climbed gradually along the hull, then stopped. Floating. Not sinking, floating. Eli released the final tension rope and stepped back. "She's buoyant," he said quietly. Silas felt something in his chest loosen, not triumph, relief. The last guide rope slipped free. The Northern Grace drifted forward a few feet into open water, guided gently by current and gravity. Silas stepped onto the deck. The wood flexed but held. He walked to the helm and rested his hands on the wheel, dead instruments surrounding it. No engine mounted yet, no propulsion, just flotation. And that was enough for now. Eli stood on shore, watching. "You ever notice," he called out softly, "boats don't remember how long they've been out of water?" Silas looked down at the surface, ripples brushing steel. Ranger moved to his side, tail steady, ears forward toward the widening channel. Silas nodded once. "Maybe they don't keep count," he replied. The sun dipped lower. Light spread across the water like liquid copper. The Northern Grace drifted a few more feet, guided by rope from shore. She did not list. She did not crack. She floated as if she had only paused. Silas stood there, boots planted on the deck, Ranger beside him, the forest behind them, the water ahead. He had feared the moment when time would run out again. But time had not failed today. It had required work. It had required patience. It had required others. Eli secured the final shoreline and nodded. "We'll mount the outboard tomorrow." Silas did not answer immediately. He looked at the water, then at Ranger, then at the sky turning violet. Not every ending was a collapse. Sometimes the last failure was simply the last obstacle before forward motion. He stepped back onto shore and coiled the rope neatly. Behind him, the yacht rested in water once more, no longer stranded, not restored, but returned. And for the first time since finding it, Silas did not feel like he was racing a clock. He felt like he had met it. They did not make flyers. They did not post announcements. Word traveled the way it always had in small northern towns. Through hardware stores, over diner counters, between gas pumps and boat ramps. By the time the new outboard motor was mounted and calibrated, a handful of people knew something was happening at the old Cedar Arm channel. Silas kept his focus narrow. Torque settings, fuel line integrity, transom reinforcement. The motor, a modern 150 horsepower outboard, matte black and clean-lined, looked almost futuristic against the weathered steel of the Northern Grace. Eli had supervised the bracket welds personally, his steady hands ensuring weight distribution wouldn't compromise balance. "She won't be fast," Eli said that morning, tightening the final bolts. "But she'll move honest." Silas appreciated that phrase. Move honest. Ranger stood near the stern as the motor was lowered into place, head slightly tilted, ears attentive to the unfamiliar hum machinery. He was still strong, still sharp, but age had begun to soften the angles of him. The fur around his muzzle showed faint threads of gray now. His movements were deliberate rather than impulsive. He had learned patience the way veterans do. Silas ran a hand over Ranger's back. "Last check," he murmured. The small gathering at the shoreline remained quiet. Eli stood with arms folded. Mara leaned against her truck, uniform crisp but expression softened. June Halverson stood near the edge of the water, hands clasped loosely before her, sweater sleeves pushed up slightly. June's silver hair caught sunlight like spun glass. Her eyes, warm, observant, tracked Silas not with curiosity, but with recognition. She had seen men like him before, not the uniform, the silence. No one expected a speech. Silas climbed aboard. The deck felt steadier now, familiar beneath his boots. The hull had been scrubbed of heavy rust. Patches of original steel gleamed through protective primer. The name remained intact across the bow. Northern Grace. Below it, in smaller clean lettering, newly engraved but understated, Second Watch. He had insisted on placing it beneath the original name, not replacing it, not erasing the past, just acknowledging continuation. He adjusted the throttle and turned the key. The motor coughed once, twice, then caught. The vibration traveled through the deck into his boots. Silas stilled. It had been years since he'd stood at the helm of anything moving forward. The channel widened into the main stretch of lake water, sunlight breaking across its surface in sheets of gold. He eased the throttle forward. The Northern Grace responded, not with urgency, but with steady, measured push. Water parted along the hull. Ranger stepped lightly toward the bow and settled there, forepaws braced, body aligned with forward motion. The boat did not lurch. It did not strain. It glided. Halfway down the channel, just as the boat cleared the narrow pumbas, reeds and entered open water, Ranger did something unexpected. He did not remain braced forward. He turned, slowly. He faced Silas instead of the horizon. For a long moment, he simply looked at him. Not scanning, not alerting, looking. Silas felt the weight of that gaze more than the engine's vibration. The lake stretched wide ahead, open, forgiving. But Ranger's eyes held something quieter, an acknowledgement, as if the mission was no longer the boat, as if it had never been. Silas swallowed. The dog turned back toward the water, satisfied, and the boat continued forward. The lake opened fully now, vast, reflective, bordered by dark pine ridges and pale rock. The engine hummed consistently, no sputter, no warning vibration. Silas adjusted his stance and allowed himself, for the first time, to feel the movement rather than monitor it. Wind lifted his hair slightly. The smell of fresh water and sunlight filled his lungs. Behind him, on shore, the small group watched without fanfare. Eli nodded once, satisfied. Mara's arms relaxed at her sides. June smiled faintly, lips pressed together in approval. No one waved, no one applauded. They did not need to. Silas guided the Northern Grace in a slow arc across the water, testing responsiveness. Steering was smooth, balance stable. The hull cut clean lines through the surface. He reduced throttle and allowed the boat to drift. Silence settled once the engine idled down. Only water against steel. Ranger remained at the bow, but his posture softened. He lowered himself into a sit, tail resting against the deck, ears half back in calm attentiveness. Silas stepped away from the helm and joined him. The lake reflected late afternoon light in warm, amber tones. The sky had shifted from bright blue to something deeper, layered with soft clouds. He placed his hand gently at the base of Ranger's neck. Warm fur, steady pulse. He felt older in that moment, not in body, but in understanding. He had not restored a boat to outrun memory. He had not done it to honor a stranger's legacy. He had done it because something had been left unfinished. And he no longer wanted to live unfinished. The boat drifted slightly with current. The name at the bow caught sunlight. Northern Grace, second watch. Silas inhaled slowly. "We're still here," he said quietly. Not loudly enough for Shore to hear, not dramatically. Just true. Ranger shifted closer, pressing lightly against his leg. The lake carried them in gentle rhythm. After a few minutes, Silas returned to the helm and turned the boat back toward shore. The shoreline grew larger again, Eli's figure distinct, Mara's silhouette steady, June's pale sweater bright against darker trees. He eased the throttle carefully, aligning the approach with practiced precision. The hull touched shallow water smoothly. Engine off. Silence. He secured the line and stepped down onto the shore. Eli approached first, offering a single firm handshake. "She floats honest," he said. Silas nodded. "Thank you." Mara extended her hand next. "You did it right," she said simply. June did not offer a handshake. She stepped closer and placed a gentle hand briefly on Silas's arm. "You didn't run," she observed quietly. "No," he replied. She smiled. "That's enough." Ranger jumped lightly from deck to shore, landing with quiet confidence. He shook himself once and stood beside Silas. The sun dipped lower, coloring the lake in deeper gold and orange. The Northern Grace rested near shore now, rocking gently, not stranded, not claimed by flood or neglect, just present. Silas looked back at the boat one final time before gathering the coiled rope. The past had not disappeared. It never would. But it no longer dictated direction. He walked away from the shoreline beside Ranger, boots steady on packed earth. Behind him, the Northern Grace floated quietly in evening light, the smaller engraving beneath her name catching the last ray of sun. Second watch, not a replacement, not a rescue, a continuation. And somewhere between water and sky, something inside Silas had returned to motion. Sometimes the miracle isn't loud. It doesn't split the sky or shake the ground. Sometimes it waits quietly in the woods for 14 years. Sometimes it looks like rust and silence. Sometimes it looks like a man who almost gave up and didn't. The Northern Grace did not return to the water because of luck. It returned because someone decided not to walk away again. And maybe that's how God works most of the time. Not through lightning, not through spectacle, but through small obediences, through second chances, through a dog that stands still when a man forgets how to breathe, through strangers who show up without applause, through the quiet strength to try one more time. Steel remembers pressure, and so do we. If you are watching this and you feel like something in your life has been stranded, if you feel like time ran out on you, if you feel like you were left somewhere between storms, maybe you are not finished. Maybe you are only waiting for your second watch. God does not waste what survives. He does not abandon what endures. He does not forget the ones who are still here. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that it is not too late. Leave a comment and tell us what you are still standing through. Subscribe to this channel if you believe in stories of courage, loyalty, and second chances. And wherever you are tonight, may God steady your footing, strengthen your hands, and guard your watch.